Hello all, welcome to the Linux Rootkits for Red Blue Teams course at Pentester Academy. Now in the last video, we've already installed Ubuntu. So in this video, let's look at installing the latest version of the kernel and other development environment utilities. So the idea is really simple. Kernel modules, which is what we shall use to develop rootkits, needs to be compiled against a very specific version of the kernel you want to run it on. So to do this, what we are going to do is download the latest kernel sources from kernel.org and then compile and install that kernel on our Ubuntu 18.04 LTS machine. So let's jump right in. Okay, so I'm going to open up a new terminal. And let's go ahead and install utilities which we require. So I'm going to do a sudo apt update first, which will go ahead and allow me to make sure that we can install packages from the repo. So I'm going to do a sudo apt update. Okay, done. Now let's go ahead and install the essential packages. So sudo apt install. Probably know some of these packages. The first, of course, is going to be build essential. Then I'm going to install my editor Vim. So I like to use Vim, but feel free to use Pico, Nano, gedit, whatever you like. Then we need fake root. We need Bison and Flex. Also need cc cache so that we can go ahead and do the compilations faster for next runs. Then we are going to install the kernel package. I'm also installing ghex, which is a hex editor, something we are going to use for some of the labs. And then I'm going to install libn curses. This is required because when we do make menu config or make nconfig, that GUI is actually built using ncurses. So we need that. We need lib ssl dev. Is there anything else we require? I mean, if we've forgotten something, then of course we will install it later. But let me double check. So build essential vim. Okay. Fake root kernel package, libssl dev. Seems to be okay. Now I've pre-installed some of these utilities. In my case, I think only Vim and ghex needs to be installed. So I'm going to put in a Y and install these packages. Now after that, what we're going to do is install the Linux kernel, a new kernel. Now I'm on kernel.org, and as of this time 4.16.7 is the stable kernel. Now what I'm about to kind of go ahead and show you in this video should work even for later kernels, but if you'd like to be consistent, then you can go ahead and download the same kernel. Okay, leave that to you. So I'm going to go ahead, download this wget. Nothing like making sure it works for the very latest version of the kernel, right? A lot of tutorials and everything you may find, most of them unfortunately are very outdated. And that's the reason why I decided to create this course, because we do teach some of this stuff in real world classes. But I think, a lot more people may benefit if we put this online. Okay, downloaded the kernel. Let's actually create a directory called Linux. So if you notice, I've shifted to a Windows machine. For some odd reason, I actually have a slightly older MacBook Pro, and the fan seems to be running a little too much when I'm recording and in the VM, and that was actually creeping into the microphone as well. So now I'm going to use one of my Dell supercomputers where hopefully that problem should not be there. Okay, so I've made the Linux directory, and I'm going to copy out Linux source code to this directory. Let me untar it. Now the next step, what we're going to do is compile a kernel we can use with this Ubuntu machine. So there are many ways to do it. Some of you may have gone ahead and compiled a kernel before. The most common one is to use, make menu config and put in all the appropriate settings, select the drivers, etc. required for this machine. Now, as you can imagine, that can be a very, very involved, painful task. So what I want to do is copy out the existing config file for the installed Ubuntu machine and use that as a starting point. Okay. So the config for the installed Ubuntu is actually going to be there inside the boot directory. This is the file. You can open this up to take a look. Let's actually make the font size a bit bigger. So these are all options which were used to go ahead and create the Linux kernel running on the current Ubuntu system. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and use this as the starting point. But of course, the newer kernel may have other options, or at the very same time, you may have to migrate out some of these settings, to the newer versions. So in order to do all of that, all we have to do is copy boot config as .config inside the Linux kernel directory. Okay, now that we've gone ahead and copied that out, should actually see config file in the current directory. Let's go ahead and make sure that we build a config which is compatible with all the new features, etc. Right? Once we do this, type in a make clean. Now, if you wanted to change any of the options, you could do a make nconfig, which is the newer interface, or you can use the old menu config or xconfig or whatever else you like using, and then you can change whatever options are required before you compile your kernel. So in my case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go with all the default options after conversion. And now let's go ahead and compile the Linux kernel. Now to do that, it's kind of better if you've already assigned multiple CPUs to the VM, because it does take a little bit of time to compile if you only give it one CPU. So let's look at the number of CPUs available. So we have 4 here. So I'm going to type in make-j4. So I want all the files to be in deb package format. And then after that, if you want to go ahead and append some custom string at the end of the kernel. Now this comes in handy when you have multiple kernels and you want to boot one of them. So it's easier just to remember based on a string which you can append. So to do that, we need to type in local version followed by whatever string you want. So I'm just going to say -rootkit. Okay. Now after this, you're going to hit an enter and wait for a while. So if you notice, it already gives us a little message here. So let's actually install this sudo apt install lib elf dev. Great. Let's run a make clean once again. And rerun it. Hopefully we should not get that message anymore. Yep. Seems like we are fine. So let's wait for the compilation to begin, and then I'm going to pause this video for some time. So it is going to take at least half an hour to 40 minutes for the whole compilation to go through, maybe even more, depending on how powerful your VM is. So here we go. Just going to go ahead. Okay, so the compilation is finished now, and what you'd find is if we go up one directory, you will be able to see deb package is available now for installation. So let's go ahead and install this. So I'm going to install sudo. The first one I'm going to install is the image, and I'm going to install the non-debug ones. Oops. There we go. So let's install the image. This should take a couple of seconds, maybe up to a minute. So once we install the new compiled kernel image, then we are going to install the headers and all of the other stuff as well. And what you'd notice is that right now inside the boot directory, you would actually find that we would have a VM liners rootkit, the -rootkit one, system map rootkit, right, an init.rd image rootkit, and the config for the rootkit as well, right? So this allows us to put all of the essential files in so that later on we can configure grub to boot this new image. So let me now install the headers. And anytime you want to go ahead and create a kernel with custom capability to try out different possibilities on it, this is how you would actually work. Okay, so all of this, as you can notice, does take a little bit of time. The compilation takes some time as well. This is an exercise in patience. Okay. Let's install libc. Okay, now I'm going to open up etc default grub. just so I can make some modifications. Now by default what happens is that if you have the hidden timeout and hidden timeout quiet etc set to true, you won't see that little grub prompt we are used to. So I'm going to comment both of these out just so that we can see what's there in the prompt. Now after this I'm going to run sudo update grub. So this will update the grub configuration file. Once we do this, we should be ready to reboot the system into our new kernel. So fingers crossed. If we did anything wrong, this is the place where it can actually blow up. So I don't know if you can see it. Unfortunately, this seems to be in a much more smaller screen. But if you click on advanced options for Ubuntu, you'd actually see now the default one is the Ubuntu with Linux 4.16.7 for the rootkit, dash rootkit. So this is now the default one anyway. So I'm going to try to load this. Again, fingers crossed. Anything can go wrong here. So let's hope for the best. Actually, in a couple of instances, I've actually seen that it actually hangs here and I've had to like reboot it once and then it seems to work. Hopefully, I'm assuming we don't have to go through that pain here. So let's wait for it. See what happens. Okay. Everything seems to be okay so far. The way to verify that we are running the latest kernel is to type in uname-r. And if you notice, now we are running the 4.16.7 rootkit kernel. Fantastic. So this is what we want. And we also have our Linux directory, where we have the entire 4.16.7 Linux tree all compiled, which is what we require when we are going to go ahead and create modules for this kernel. Fantastic. So that's all I had in mind for this video. As I said, we are going to be using the 4.16.7 kernel. Can use a newer one, but in case you face any issues, make sure that this is what you use to follow along in the videos. So this is all I had in mind for this video. If you're enjoying your time at Pentester Academy, please do recommend us to your friends and colleagues in the InfoSec community. Thank you.